welcome to CFO Insight TV. The European crisis has been with us for 4 years now, and if by now companies haven't found a way to cut costs and raise profitability, then they've probably ceased to exist. Today, we'll be discussing the implications of this for CFOs, and I'm pleased to welcome a proven expert in the field, Antonio Alvarez, the European head of turnaround consultancy, Alvarez Marsal.
Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Tony. You typically arrive at a company when it's already in a very difficult situation, and the CFO is in an awkward position in that company because, on the one hand, he's the one with a deep financial understanding. On the other hand, he needs to appease creditors and lenders. Do you think that makes him more powerful or less powerful?
In a crisis, for sure, the CFO becomes a more powerful figure. He has access to information. What he says is very, very important to the creditors and other stakeholders. He has to have a pulse on the cash like no other moment in time in the history of the firm. And he's got to deliver tough messages, unpleasant messages, the bearer of bad news. And he's got to do that in an effective way. So, yeah, the CFO becomes a very important figure in a crisis.
To be the bearer of bad news isn't very appeasing to many people. What sort of person does the CFO need to be in such a company for him or her to be a good CFO?
Some CFOs relish this moment of having to be objective and having a lot of integrity and having a lot of details at the fingertips. This is the moment that a CFO will shine. Some that are put in that crisis situation shun it, are shy away from it. It's high pressure. And you really have those two types of personalities, and some that'll just rise up to the occasion, and some that don't. And firms like ourselves, at times, we take on the interim role because it is so important. Oftentimes, we're supporting a CFO that relishes it and trying to make that CFO as good as they can be, and lending our experience in these situations. And some just don't cope with it.
When we look at the current situation, we actually see lots of companies in Europe with huge cash reserves. They've been piling up cash on their balance sheets. Do you think it's become too much?
No. I think you can't generalize because there's different industries, there's different industry dynamics, and there's going to be some industries where companies may have excess cash that they should be returning or investing in a different way. But for the most part, you're going to be looking at very stagnant growth, stagnant economies across Europe for the next 3 to 4 years, maybe longer. And in that circumstance where you have low growth or challenging growth, you're going to be really put on the defensive. And then credit's becoming more difficult. It's tightening. Banks are having to prune their own balance sheets. They're under a lot of pressure themselves. And so the ability and access to cash is not going to be as easy. You're going to get pressure from suppliers, pressure from customers. It's going to come from all angles. And I think it's smart to be safe. It's smart to be focusing on your cost control. It's smart to try to make as much of your cost variable as possible. So if the revenues come in, you can ramp up. If the revenues don't come in, you can flex down. So flexibility and variability is what's important for CFOs and companies to do to protect themselves or to prepare themselves for the coming years across Europe.
One way many CFOs try to cut costs, or companies try to cut costs and raise profitability, is by pruning out unprofitable product ranges. However, that usually leads to a conflict between the CFO and the person responsible for those products, because they lose some of their power, really. What do you advise CFOs they do in that situation to ensure that the right products leave the company?
I think to be as factual as you can, to make the analysis speak for itself, and to win over the other stakeholders. So I think there's got to be dialogue between the CFO, the CEO, and the broader stakeholders that are that have an interest in the business, including obviously the employees and the effective staff of the company. We think, it's our view, that over the next coming short period of time, call it 3 to 4 years, you've really got to be more challenging of the product lines that you are in, and the profitability of those product lines. So that if you've got marginal product lines, you ought to really be getting out of them. If you've got marginal businesses, you ought to be getting out of them. If you're in a high growth, if you're going to enter a high growth environment, you can take a chance because some of those businesses have a chance to capture the growth that's going to happen, the marginal business. But if you're going to enter a period of stagnation or negative growth, you look at Southern Europe, it's probably negative growth, then you can't afford to be in those. It's a pretty obvious choice, unless you're in an industry, telecommunications, where you got new media, digital products, where you're in a high growth segment. That's the exception. But for most of the businesses out there, particularly those that don't have exports to the emerging markets, you're looking at best modest growth.
It's time to turn to our 3 questions.
Yes.
And I would ask you to answer them with as simple as possible, ideally with a yes and no.
That's hard to do.
Will the number of turnarounds continue to rise?
Yes.
Will European companies be able to wring more cash from their working capital?
Yes.
And will negotiations with creditors get tougher?
Yes and no. In certain cases, tougher. In certain cases, I think we have an incrementalist environment across the financial community. It's gone through a series of shocks. And so will it get tougher? In certain cases, yes. In certain cases, no different. As tough as it has been, or as lax as it has been, most likely, when it comes to a corporate negotiation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for your insights. And thank you for watching.